Welcome to the TryPod, where we break down the NRL every game, every week from a punting perspective. I'm Jacob Wynn. I'm here to break down round 21, but we will do a super quick recap of round 20 since we don't have that regular Sunday show anymore. So let's just go game by game, guys, and I can address our best bet results there as well. So Dolphins destroyed the Cowboys. Cowboys were still technically fighting for their season, showed very little life in this one. It was basically over by halftime, a little bit of a fight back second half. The Dolphins just dismantled the Cowboys. Amazing to see that there's virtually no drop-off for the Finns, even with so many of their starting forward packs still unavailable. And sadly, many will be out for the year. So that's pretty much Cowboys' season over there. Then on Friday, this was a big game, and it was pretty close for the most part, but the Sharkies ran away with it. 13-plus win probably doesn't tell you the whole story. There was a bit of controversial refereeing. I'd even go as far to say I don't even completely understand all the rules or interpretations this year. Like when they're going to rule a roll ball is so subjective. And you're seeing some games where there's no consistency from one to the next. There are a bunch of calls like that in Sharks Roosters, but ultimately Sharkies too strong there. And that was a massive game in terms of finals implications. Later Friday night, Panthers destroyed the Bunnies 30-10, even without Cleary and Yo. Rabbitohs injury ravaged. That was the first best bet. And the best bet was Rabbitohs to have less than 3.5 tries. And in fact, the 10 points doesn't even tell you that Alex Johnston scored in the 80th minute. So 1 try through 79 minutes. Good best bet winner there in that game. On Saturday, the second best bet was Raiders minus 11.5, but 40-16 doesn't tell you the whole tale of that either, where Parramatta led 16-12 at halftime. Funny one, because Raiders are up 12-0 after 5 minutes. Then Para actually gets ascendancy, is leading into the second half. Canberra back in somewhat control. I mean, Canberra's up 6 with 8 minutes to go. So although Canberra was dominating, if Para could have come up with one play, one moment, anything can happen in a game, then the result could have been, in question. But in fact, Canberra scored 3 tries in the final 8 minutes, won by 24, and we only needed them to win by 12 for the best bet. So had a chance to sweep. In fact, with the very next game, Dogs, Dragons, but I think 2-1 was a fair result for the best bets last week because the Bulldogs were lucky to even get out alive with that one against the Dragons, needing a game-winning try with just a couple minutes to go. Another, somewhat controversial game, but Galvin getting the first start at 7, scoring another try for the Doggies and having the game-winning assist is going to silence a lot of the critics. And that's also just a devastating loss for the Dragons and the story of their season. When they're not losing by 1 point, they're losing by 2 points. And it was a 2-point margin Saturday night, and this was a real surprise as well. The Seagulls down in Melbourne getting the upset there. Melbourne's so sloppy, uncharacteristically sloppy, especially on an old boys night, but just don't take anything away from Manly to go down to Melbourne, and then the Seagulls aren't at full strength, and to just out-tough the Storm. And, the Ruben Garrick effort ultimately on the Xavier Coates try, and Coates had 3. It's an intercept. It's a length of the field effort where Garrick is chasing from centre all the way down one wing and then all the way across the field and makes Coates dive in the corner. The conversion from Meaney hits the post, and ultimately Melbourne lose by 2 points. Now, that's controversial as well because the winning points come off a penalty goal after Luke Brooks has a field goal attempt that misses, but there's contact from Grant. Personally, I think the bunker should be able to look at it and say it's minimal contact. I really do think a player sprinting in still a controlled manner. Like, it would be different if Grant just fully dived and launched at Brooks, but he's sprinting towards him to try and put pressure on the kick, and his body contacts the following through leg, which is not as dangerous as if he'd thrown his weight into the plant leg. I think they should just be able to say, it's minimal contact. It's no different to hitting a ball player late. If you don't smash them, and if you just sort of let them know you're there and bump into them after they've passed it, it's not a penalty, right? So anyway, I think that the Seagulls deserve to win because, the Nelson call I thought was mind-blowing. I'll bring that one up later. But great win by Manly. Surprise. And, that was a run going back to the Dogs. game, Manly. We'll get to Sunday, like a run of games that all went down to the wire. Because then Sunday, I would say the two sides that won were very lucky to win. Tigers, Titans, I warned you guys, it was going to be a shocker. This is how I describe it. It was the worst game I've ever seen. Tigers 21 beat Titans 20. It was the worst game of rugby league ever, but highly entertaining. It was entertaining because they were both desperate. It was back and forth. It was down to the wire, but I couldn't believe how bad these sides were. Like, I was watching this game. Whoever loses, the coach should have to resign on the spot. And if you saw Dez's reaction, you know, he probably felt just about the same way. The Tigers, with a late comeback despite running into the breeze second half, and even when they didn't look like they were going to execute a field goal, Dewey gets one off a couple of passes and it wobbles over. And the Tigers, unfortunately for a neutral, probably have set the Titans on the path for a wooden spoon, as opposed to, had Gold Coast won this, there'd only be 2 points between these sides who do meet again in round 27. We could add another spoon bowl, which for a neutral, I think we would have liked to see, but it's just more pain and defeat for Dez's Titans. And then Knights Warriors. This was probably the craziest finish of the round and one of the craziest finishes in recent memory in a regular season rugby league game. And again, the Knights, you know, should have had this game won and get in front late. Although the Warriors, if you're a Warriors fan, you would have felt hard done by. Tanner Boyd misses 2 or 3 field goals and a penalty from in front. And still, Tanner Boyd steps up on the final play of the game to attempt a 45-meter field goal for the win, which is charged down. And of course, I'm telling you what you already know, because you had to have seen this highlight. Lecker the wrecker, as Benny Williamson says there. And, you know, I almost like, this guy's my favorite player in the whole comp. And I almost feel like, this is a weird thing to say, but I feel like disappointed because now he's everybody's favorite player. It's like that band that you like that's really under the radar, and then when they become mainstream, you sort of get protective because, like, oh, I liked him before, or you guys liked him. But I mean, Halasima has, well, that's a walk-off try in every sense of the word. That was just insane. The way that he picked the ball up, if you watch the replay closely, he has to step backwards to pick the ball up. So it's not a standing start. He's actually moving backwards. And then the way that he accelerates those first 20 meters, just zooms through the Knights line, he was still covered. And puts a move on the fullback, which usually when you step the fullback, you're going to have to slow down. You're going to have to move laterally and somebody else is going to catch up to you. And the way that he puts that move on the fullback and then carries defenders over the line, it's one of the incredible individual tries. Given the context, it's not even scores a level. They're down 1. So if he doesn't get to the try line, it's the final play that Warriors don't win. That's highly important for New Zealand's season, who are still trying to stay in the top 4. It's not the first game-winning try for Halasima this year. He's 19 years old. I've been crying out for years for the Warriors to unearth the next superstar. I mean, we've seen like Tuivasa Sheck, Jerome Hughes, Joey Manu. We've seen awesome Kiwi players. Admittedly, Halasima may be Tongan, but, you know, coming through the Kiwi system there. And it's been years since the Warriors have like unearthed like a genuine superstar. And that's what this kid might be. It's just really exciting, heartbreaking for Newcastle. And, you know, the sub storyline there that the Knights, half the team was in hospital and had a, you know, horrendous virus going through the camp. So for them to even be competitive, but really the Knights should have won this game, not just because they were in front with a second to go, but also because the Knights butchered opportunities earlier in the game. And some of those results are going to play into potentially how I play round 21. And I admit I've let you down early, guys, because I've somehow already spoken for 9 minutes. And usually, in fact, basically always, we give you the best bets inside the first 5. So I apologize. I'm a few minutes late. But again, 2-1 last week. I think we've gone 2-1 the last 3 weeks. 37 and 30 overall with the Raiders minor prem bet pending. And that's looking really good since the Raiders rolled on the weekend and Melbourne were upset. And we'll talk about ladder implications as we get game by game, but it really does look to me, guys, like there are 10 good teams left in this competition. But as you know, only 8 can play finals footy. So we're going to have 2 good teams missing the finals, which just goes to show how important, you know, some of those results were. And we'll get to that in a second. But you want to hear my best bets, perhaps, and let me know what you think of them, as well as your highlights of round 20. Did I stir up any emotions just doing my lightning fast recap then? Here's my 4 best bets anyway, just to put them out there. And then, of course, we'll go more in depth through the slate. And first game of round 21, I will have a best bet, and it'll be in the first 40 minutes. And I'm going to take the Roosters plus 2.5 in the first half at $1.88. They host the Storm, and for me, I barely can split these sides. I know Melbourne's better than the Roosters, but you've got no Pappenhausen, no Munster, and it's in Sydney, and it's basically must win for the Roosters. And I'm going to take 2.5 in the first half. I'm also going to take the Cowboys on Friday, and I'm going to play the Cowboys over 4.5 team tries, and that's $1.80 on Ladbrokes and Neds, because I think it's going to be an intensity let off for Cowboys and Dragons, because they're both basically, their hopes are dashed for both sides. They'd have to run the table. Realistically, it's not happening. I think the Shackles get let off, and I still think there's more game breakers for the Cowboys who are at home. I sort of like overs and points in that encounter, so that's why I've played Cowboys for, to score 5 tries or more. Then I'm playing the Raiders minus 13.5, and I just mentioned that the Knights had their hearts ripped out of their chest, and I see this one similarly to the game a week ago where I laid 11.5 with the Raiders against the Eels. Admittedly, it didn't go the way exactly as I expected, because it was a lot tighter for 70, but I kind of feel like even if Newcastle keeps it competitive for a while, the Raiders can ultimately crush you in the end. And I could also see this one just being a bit of a demolition job. So Raiders 13.5, $1.85 on Better, that one is. Sorry, can't remember if I said the bookie already, or if I did say sports betting correctly. It's that one's on Better. And then last game of the round, I'm taking the Dogs in that finals week 1 rematch against Manly, minus 2.5, $1.90 on Ladbrokes and Neds. It's minus 3.5 everywhere, which is essentially the same thing. Burden is known for a cheeky field goal, but I'd certainly still play minus 3.5 at $1.90. And it's a really simple handicap for me. I think the Dogs are clearly the better team, despite the fact that the Dogs haven't put anybody away in the last month. And Manly's won 3 on the trot and got a highly impressive win in Melbourne. And Harmoli comes back into the side. And yet I still can't go past the fact that the Doggies are a genuine premiership contender to mine. Manly are not. And this is a really low line for the home side there. So that's how I see it with my 4 best bets, and we'll get to them game by game for more in-depth analysis. Let's bring up the team lists, right? And Thursday night, we've got a great one to start. You've heard that I do have a best bet in this, and it's Roosters Storm at Allianz, and the line is minus 4.5 or minus 5.5, depending on where you look. And so that loss for the Roosters was brutal in round 20, because it was a high leverage game against Cronulla, of course, with it being 8th versus 9th. So losing that was never, going to be a favorable result for the Roosters. It was always going to hurt them on the ladder. But then the night before, the Dolphins had one, who are in contention for a final spot. And the one that would have really stung too would be Manly winning in Melbourne, which would have been, quite unexpected. So everybody in and around that top 8 logjam, all those sides fighting for sort of 7th and 8th one, other than the Roosters, which meant that they went from pick'em or something to make the 8 to $4.50. So still not out of their grasp, and they still control their own destiny, the Tricolours, but that makes this game highly important. And they'll have to do it without Billy Smith, who got a concussion, and Victor Radley got a shoulder injury. So as you can see, Siwa Wong starts at lock. Sandon Smith is into the halves for Chad. Who could have predicted that picking Chad Townsend again wasn't going to work? But the thing is, for Melbourne, Munster is out with personal leave. I believe his father's funeral may actually be on game day or around the game day. So Wishart is going to play 5/8. Nelson suspended. I think I touched on that briefly. I thought it was, it was pretty clear case of what should have been a sin bin against Manly. So I think in that regard, it's lucky that Manly won the game anyway, or else I think the Seagulls would have been very hard done by. And I sort of hate the fact that they can't get it right on the night, but then in retrospect, they suspend him, and that doesn't help Manly whatsoever. Not that Manly's complaining, because they did win anyway, but this Pappenhausen being sidelined with a calf strain is a little bit concerning. Melbourne's not the same team with Nick Meaney at fullback. And look, I do understand that the Storm are off a loss and they're going to be intimidating here, but is there that much between these teams? I look at the team list on the screen. If you are watching this in video format, the Roosters have got the better outside backs for mine with who's available. I know Hughes is the reigning Dalian medalist, but Walker can more or less cancel him out. Of course, Grant, as he showed in Origin, is the superior hooker, but Watson's still a rep player in there. Nafahu White, has had a great year and ultimately has reduced a bit of the pain the Roosters would have felt letting Terrell May walk. I know the Storm have got the better back row. Katoa is having another career season. Liero, the same thing. But like the Roosters have got Angus Crichton there. Feketi has been a breakout star. You've both got legendary coaches. It's one of the great rivalries in the game. When you think about, Roosters Rabbitohs, you could say Storm Manly, but these two teams were the most successful of the 2010s, met in a grand final. This is a great rivalry, and there's lots of great games between these. As Zed says, Munster being a big out, absolutely. And, I'd say it's sort of a must-win for both of them. The Storm, after losing a game they should have won, always play with their hair on fire next game. But for the Roosters, they're going to feel like if they're going to, make a finals charge, they've got to be able to win this one. And you are playing Melbourne minus a couple of marquee stars. If I could have found a +6, I'd probably prefer to play the Roosters for the full game because I just like them in this matchup. I give them every chance to win. But I am going to play with fire a little bit and play the first half line because I couldn't get a +6. So I just generally prefer a +2.5 first half to a +4.5 or 5.5 for a game over 40 minutes when there may not be many points because I expect finals intensity. Yeah, Bellyache will get his squad switched on for sure. But it goes back to a pretty simple principle I've got. If I look at a game and I go, this is going to be a beauty, then who am I going to take? I've got to take the points. Except I'll Storm a lock for top 4, risk slipping. No, absolutely still a lock for top 4. And Melbourne's going to be still looking for and fighting to finish top 2. And therefore play that first week of the finals top 4 clash in Melbourne. But currently they do sit 3rd. So I'm not suggesting that this isn't also important for the Storm or that the Storm won't play well. But it's a huge spot for East and they've got the ability to match Melbourne here. I think that line is a little bit high. Moving to Friday, we go to Townsville, QCB Stadium, and the Cows are a 5.5-point favourite as well, 4 or 5.5-point favourite. But I would suggest the season ended for both these teams last week. And for the Dragons, it was a lot more cruel. That came down to a minute to go, giving up a try, as opposed to the Cowboys were all but buried by halftime. And I mentioned the North Queensland plus-minus last week. It slipped even further. The Cowboys have the worst differential in the league. That's how bad they've gone this season, and that's how badly the Cows have defended because they actually got a half-decent attack. And again, my best bet is relying on the Cowboys attack because I have played Cowboys team tries over 4.5. St. George, on the other hand, well, their plus-minus isn't too bad because they lose narrowly time and time again. Now, Talangi is out. He hurt his hammy. That brings Braden Burns to the wing. Purdue goes back to centre, and Duffy is in at 6. Bateman returns for the Cows, which allows Cotter to shift back to his natural position of lock. McKaylee is out, though. No major changes for St. George, who just couldn't hang on against a Canterbury side with a lot of class. And I have said it time and time again this year, as Steve says, up the mighty Dargans. It's just not St. George's year. Just a team that, is very honest, fights hard, generally gives a good account of themselves. I've probably backed against them one too many times. I've had a best bet against St. George probably each and every week for the last month, and we might have only won 1 of 4, to be fair. And we didn't win last week. That cost me a sweep. And I'll go as far to say the Dragons should have won the game, let alone the line, which was 7.5 or closed 9.5, I think. But the fact still is that the Dragons don't have a great amount of talent, are 6-11, would have to win their final 6 games to make the finals. Realistically, that's not happening. In-house, do they still believe it's happening? Because if internally a team still is playing with belief, then it doesn't really matter whether it's realistic or not. And I would say in retrospect, you look back at the Cowboys game, and you say, well, that they went down to the wire against Canterbury. That was clearly an all-in game, and the Cows couldn't pick themselves up after losing to the Dogs in a tight one. But what just happened to the Dragons? The Dragons just got their heart ripped out by that same opponent, by Canterbury, and that was a crushing loss. And as Tim mentions, like I didn't bring up Val Holmes being out, but Holmes was ruled out for the season, I think, but certainly a serious injury before the game last week. So you got no Val Holmes for the Dragons either, and he was their one and only Origin player. So I do expect a very real chance of a deflation factor for the Dragons, who now have to travel north and get 2 less days to prepare for this game than the Cowboys, who were highly disappointing against the Dolphins. And you can tell me, well, mathematically, it's a do or die game because they've both got to win every game remaining to make the finals. But since I already consider both these teams virtually dead, I think this will be a less intense level of footy. I think the sides actually, the coaches, to get the best out of their team, have to somewhat let them play with a bit more freedom and try and enjoy and express themselves in a lower stakes game. And at home, I've got a Cowboys side that's still got Tommy Dearden and Drinkwater and Robson and Nane, and that's why I'm going to play the Cows and why I think it's an overs spot. And I don't trust the Cows' defense. That's why I didn't play -5.5. But when the Cows have the running, they can light it up like anybody. They'll look like the Harlem Globetrotters for 15 minutes in a row where they can score 3 tries, in periods. That's why I like the Cowboys over their team total tries. Someone asked, what about Dragons over 3.5 tries? Like, I don't mind that either. But if you think the Dragons have got a few tries in them as well, I'd probably just play the whole game over 8.5 tries, for example. Because I definitely think the Cowboys will have a few in them in this one. And move to later Friday night, the Broncos should have plenty of points and tries in them as well. So let me scroll down to reveal those team lists, because there's a couple of names very notable there. Reminder, Brisbane are off a bye and have won 5 in a row. Para's season is lost. To my surprise, the Eels gave a great account of themselves in Canberra last week for 70. Again, final score 40-16. It doesn't tell you the full story in that one. But Iongi hurt his hand. That's a real shame. That guy has been a stud this year for the Eels. So that shifts Joash Papali to 1. So, all right, Papali's been playing 6, so the Eels need a 6. If only they had a really good 5'8". Oh, wait, they do. Dylan Brown making $1 million a season, and he remains in the reserves because Riles would prefer to play Hawkins, who is a halfback, at 5'8" in this one. And at halfback, you do get Mitch Moses, who is returning from his calf injury that's held him out since he was scratched pre-Origin 2. Penasini is also back in the centres. Payne Haas rejoins his teammates after getting a rest last Broncos game. And I see this one similar to the last Eels game. I don't want to play Para at this point in the season, and that's despite the fact, yes, they had a second half lead last week, but it's a team that's not even playing for the present and not playing their best possible lineup and don't have the ability to match Brisbane in this one. And I've got a Brisbane side who I strongly considered 13 plus. Like the line's The line's 13.5 at $1.90, but 13 plus was $1.88. So on our sports bet, so that's like 2 cents less. And you could win by 13, and someone like Reynolds could easily slot a cheeky field goal there. So that's how I would play this. I'd play Brisbane 13 plus, but I suppose I started second guessing it. Moses is Parramatta's captain. They're a different team when Moses is in there. You did see some encouraging signs. You do have an Eels side that's not playing with any pressure because Riles has basically volunteered that it's just about building combinations and chemistry, and it's not about necessarily getting results. And, of course, Brisbane's going to be a very public play being at home off 5 straight wins. So that's why I ultimately passed. Let's move to Saturday in New Zealand. It's Warriors-Titans. The Warriors are, was it over 12? Or last I checked just a few moments ago, 11.5 point favourites are New Zealand. That win, again, is critical for the Warriors to keep the Broncos at bay in terms of that top 4 spot. But the thing is, there's still plenty of footy to be played. And while New Zealand has an ultra-friendly draw and should be in the top 4 at the end of the year, you've still got to take care of business and beat these teams. Just like on paper, New Zealand should have had the Knights covered, but they didn't for 79 minutes there. And it's similar story here with the Titans. I mean, this is the easiest game you can get on paper. You're playing what will be this year's Wooden Spooners at home. But let's get into the matchup. We've got both sides who played on Sunday last week down to the horn, but had the opposite result. So the Titans fell to a loss, maybe resigned to a wooden spoon. And as if things couldn't get any worse, Tino hurt his knee and is out for this one as well. Dave Fafita was on the bench, only got 20 minutes, despite the fact that the Titans only had 3 forwards on the bench and AKP did not play. So you only had 3 forwards on the bench and you lost Tino, who you usually rely on for big minutes, and still only got 20 out of Fafita, and he's been dropped entirely. So he's completely on the nose for Des. New Zealand, the confidence that they will grow, that they will gain out of pulling one out of the fire last week. I mean, that's really, despite the fact that you lose your best forward. Oh, well, you've recruited Fisher Harris, yes, but Barnett was just in career form, brutal loss, and of course Metcalf as well. But you still get that belief that you can do something special in 2025, that you will be playing, at least one finals game at home at Mount Smart and finishing top 4. Anything can happen, and that just helps New Zealand so much in terms of protecting that top 4 spot. And that this week they get back Nickel Klukstart, who's a straight swap for Tuapiki. It is Dez's 500th game, so hopefully no one's going to nip off for a shower before he delivers all of his instructions for this one. Generally, you would say that's meaningful because players will lift for their leader in a milestone, but I genuinely question whether things have soured at this point, and he is sort of, and this isn't my line, but he's a Des man walking at this point. And if you watch the entirety of the game at Leichhardt, right, which I warned you, don't do it, even though I admit it was actually entertaining, but boy, it was horrible footy. You would question whether the Gold Coast had a coach at all. I mean, they were winning 14-12, and this was with a big breeze, running into a big breeze in the first half, and then they had the breeze at their back in the second half, still lost it. But at one point, I'm pretty sure the score was 14-12, and the Titans gave away a penalty for being too slow to pack their scrum, and the scrum clock expired, and that's what allowed the Tigers to level the game. It was unreal. The Tigers were begging to be put away, and the Titans just execution. It was the sloppiest game you've ever seen. And yes, the Titans were a bit hard done by. A referee missed some knock-ons, but I don't even blame the ref for missing a few knock-ons, because I reckon there were more drop balls and knock-ons in that game than any game I've ever watched. So you're going to miss a few of them. Anyway, the point is that I wonder if Des has lost the locker room here. That's why I'm not going to be on the Titans. It's a similar game to what we saw 2 weeks ago, right? The Warriors were at home to the Tigers, and as I just spoke about, the Tigers and Titans are pretty much on par, and you saw that. It's a 1-point game, in the 80th minute, right? So the Warriors did win that game by 20 in the end against West, but it was closer than that final score probably suggested. This line's a couple of points higher again as well, and I have to say it is essentially the easiest game of the year on paper when you're at home against the Titans. They're missing Tino. They're gonna finish last, right? And I'm sorry to say this because I know we get a lot of New Zealand followers and plenty of Kiwis in our audience, but if there's any team capable of a bit of a letdown in a game that you just expected to win, a little bit like when Penrith came in with their New South Wales Cup side and won, the Warriors are the type of side that can sometimes suffer a letdown when it's a really strong position and high likelihood of winning. And I'm not saying New Zealand won't win. I'm just saying you can never call New Zealand a lock. Maybe I've overthought this one. Tell me what you reckon, guys. I mean, the line's 11.5. That's not that many points if the Warriors are on, right? So you've got a top 4 team at home against a team that's coming last and is in a tailspin. So as JK says, Warriors 13 plus, Titans don't play defense. Am I overthinking this one? Should I have just laid 11.5? I didn't, but let me know if it really was that easy. In my opinion, it rarely is that easy, but I don't want to be on the Titans in that game either, so I'm not going to talk you out of a Warriors bet. Let me put it that way. 5:30 Saturday at CommBank. We have a battle of the big cats of Western Sydney, and it's Penrith, who are 12.5-point favourites Panthers were in cruise control against Souths despite being without Cleary and Yeo. They both returned to the starting side. Liam Martin is in the reserves and Tungo is back from suspension. So how about the fact that Penrith have lost class in their forwards and back line every year? They've won the comp every year since 2020, and they've lost like a gun back and a gun forward every year since then. And you had Alamotti, who was unearthed and was a hero in the GF last year, but he can't even get a start this year. Such is the form of Jenkins on the wing. So it's amazing how Penrith's able to replace these players each and every year. Speaking of replacing a winger, Benji has swapped out Staines, who had several errors on Sunday, for former Souths man Thompson. So firstly, a look at the Tigers. I'm just trying to guess sort of where they're at now after that win, because you get a bit of pressure off knowing that you're not going to take home a fourth straight spoon. You've avoided that by courtesy of a wobbly drop goal by Jack of all trades, Dewey. He's out there in jersey 13, and it looked like the Tigers had messed up their execution on that final play, but he just grabbed the ball and got it through the post any which way in front of a raucous crowd. Is that a pressure let-off, as in it's an exhale spot for the Tigers this week, and it doesn't really matter if they win and they just can't bring the enthusiasm or the intensity again? Or does that win provide a bit of confidence, but also gets the monkey off the back and allows a little bit of freedom for the Tigers? And it doesn't really matter ultimately. Like, it was an awful, awful game, and it would have broken Benji if the Tigers had lost that. Like, it would have sent the Tigers in a tailspin potentially had they lost. But there's a big difference, and you win ugly, it doesn't matter. You're going to raise the energy around the facility. And energy is what West will need if they're any hope of hanging with Penrith in this one. And Penrith are a bit like Brisbane in terms of, we're somewhat writing them off 6 weeks ago, and yet here they are still eyeing a top 4 spot, or at a minimum wanting to be playing a home final, as in finishing no worse than 6th. And Origin has been navigated. Every rep player for Penrith has had a rest. It's go time for their title defence right now. That's why I'm not playing the Tigers in this one. I'm looking at the lineups. Let me know if you disagree, but there's no aspect of this match where I can pinpoint like a clear advantage to the Tigers. So how are West going to get it done in this one? Admittedly, it was tight last time they met. Correct me if I'm wrong, that was the game, Panthers-Tigers, where Sorensen had that desperation try saver, and West actually could have won if not for that tackle. And Scott Sorensen's out this week, in fact. And, there's that extra element as we saw last time they matched up. Taruva, now Taylor May, who got a club debut for Tigers and scored last week. Of course, Luai, Appy, they're facing their former teammates. It adds a little bit of spice, but equally, Nathan and Ivan know those players' games so well. If the line was a little lower, I'd be laying the points with Penrith. But it's a public side. It's a premium line, so I'll leave it. Luke says, it's been interesting to see favourites cover the vast majority of games again, and there are a lot of big favourites and double-digit favourites this week. He says, I guess I get what you're saying regarding the Tigers avoiding the spoon, but surely they need to avoid bottom 4 for Benji to have a successful season. I'm with you there. I actually heard someone saying it's a successful season if the Tigers avoid the spoon because they've had 3 spoons in a row. So if they avoid it, then that's success. And I disagree with that. You've recruited some quality players. It's a close competition. It's a salary cap competition. You can still be very bad and avoid the spoon because somebody else might just be a little bit worse. I agree that actually to show real improvement, the Tigers need to get out of the bottom 4. And really, early in the year, weren't we all saying West could be pushing finals when they, and this is just off the top of my head, they won 3 of the first 5, Sure, people will try and reframe it and make it sound good for the Tigers, but it has not been a great year, and you definitely don't want to hang your hat on a win like Sunday, right? But this is a tall task, this one, of course. So let me move to Sharks Rabbitohs because it's another game where we do have a large favourite. Rabbitohs at home to Cronulla, but Cronulla are 12.5-point favourites, and Cronulla's the obvious side again. And again, I'm not playing the big favourite here. Souths have lost 7 in a row, though. But they do get back Jai Gray at fullback, so that allows Johnston to go to the wing. Now, here's another one that I didn't research, so help me out in the comments. Johnston scored in the final play last week against Penrith. So how many tries does he need to break Ken Irvine's record now? Is it 6 tries for Johnston to break the record, or is it 6 to equal? And he's got 5 games to do it, and at least he might be on the wing, but he doesn't have Latrell there to help assist, or Cody Walker for that matter. In fact, speaking of playmaking for Souths, Pommy recruit Dodd is getting his first start at 7 for the season because Humphreys got a concussion last week. Kalomatangi is the real big loss for Souths as well, as is Nikora for the Sharks, who rolled the Roosters 13+ in the end. But the difference is for Cronulla, their squad generally is in great health and shape otherwise, and Ramian returns to centre this week. And the Rabbitohs are another team that at this point in the year might not be mathematically out, but realistically can start making reservations for an end-of-season trip in September. And it's a horrendous run of injuries more than anything. That's the reason for South's slide. You guessed it. If you're wondering who I would lean towards, it would be Cronulla. And I said last week, I was close to playing Cronulla against the Roosters. For me, it's a pretty serious mismatch in terms of experience and ability. And we talk a bit about Nico, and he's had some good games and some underwhelming, and Trindle and Kennedy, and do the Cronulla need more out of these positions? But meanwhile, Blake Brayley was masterful last week. He is an Iron Man. He goes sort of unrecognised sometimes. I think he has the current longest active streak of straight NRL games. And this is a brutal game, and he plays in the middle. And he was a deadly point of attack for Cronulla last week, and brings this powerful Sharks pack onto the ball brilliantly, and arguably is the best form hooker of all New South Wales eligible players. And speaking of hookers, I forgot to mention Mamazelis is out for Souths as well. So that's why it would be Sharks or nothing for me. But it's another game where I will refrain from playing the obvious favourite. I look at the Titans, and if you want to play New Zealand, you could say the Titans have given up, right? But you can't say that about Bennett's boys. I believe Bennett has them fighting. And that, and if you're betting a team and you're going -12.5, we've seen games where it's a pretty comfortable win for one side, but the other team fights to the end and potentially gets some late tries. So you don't want a team that's still got a lot of spirit, which I think Souths generally do. And in fact, I think that Bennett will pull an upset or two in the final 6 weeks as well. I think that they've actually got good team unity and chemistry there. Now, while I don't have a play on this game, 2 of our sharpshooters have shot me a tip for this one. You both on Rabbitohs Sharks. So let's
TryPod fam, as always, thanks to the lads for having me on. Missed out last week, unfortunately, commitments got in the way, but this week we're back with Braden Trindle at $3.60 on Bet365. Opposition left halves or 5/8 are the highest scoring position against the Bunnies. The Bunnies could not be in a worse spot, adding Kolomatangi to the injury list after last week as well. I think that right side is going to get touched up a bit. Trindle's got a 75% historical strike rate against them. Given the success that left halves have had this year, in the 7 games that they've scored, 4 doubles have been scored. So it's worth keeping your eyes on a double, but we'll settle up for the single at $3.60. Best of luck if you follow, lads, and see if we can bag a winner. Cheers.
G'day guys, Matty here. Not having the best NRL season this year, 8-9 at the moment after a 3-0 start. Had some rough weeks, but going to go for some value this week. Cronulla Sharks not to trail, $2.50 on Bet365 against South. Sharks are rounding into good form at the moment. They're getting hot at the right time of year. They want to make sure they get into that top 8. South have absolutely nothing to play for. Players out left, right and centre. I imagine Sharks are going to be way more intense, at least a lot more than South will be. I've bet this type of bet twice already this year. Both times they've covered big numbers at the line and didn't score the first try. So that one was rough. I think third time lucky, $2.50. Let's get some value. Good luck.
So on Undertaker's bet there, I generally, if I like a favourite, I think I'll try my luck with the line. because I feel more confident that's going to more greatly represent their performance. If they dominate the game, and I expect them to dominate, you'd hope you'll win by double digits, which were the games Undertaker did. I think he went like Melbourne against Titans, and they did actually cover, but the Titans led at one point. And yeah, as Matty said, he did it another game earlier this round. The issue with the never trail bet is it's just high variance. A penalty goal early, or the first try goes against you, or even you score the first, you don't convert it, or even games can swing. Like, how about the Raiders on the weekend? They won by 24, but never trail would have lost because they were up 12-0, then they were down 16-12. So the high variance there is why I don't play a bet like that. But that's also why you can't really say it's been a bad bet previously for Matty, because it's just so sensitive on, one bounce of the ball. As for Benny, I do recall he backed Trindle earlier this year, and Tricky Trindle scored at 425 for him. I think that was Benny's best value bet of the season for us. So he's gone back to the well. Now we move to Sunday, and I've mentioned I'm not on a lot of big favourites this round at all. I'm leaving them alone, a lot of the public sides, and yet this is the exception. I am laying 13.5 with the Raiders, who host the Knights on Sunday. But the line in most places, I should tell you, is 14.5. So, in fact, this is the highest line of the round, in a round with several big favourites. And it's because I think the Knights have to be totally shattered. The manner of that defeat, and, one thing I didn't bring up as well is Tanner Boyd's got to buy Halasima beers for life, man. With the how he would have been having terrors after that game if they'd lost New Zealand, which they should have. But Halasima pulls it out of the fire. The fact that the Knights, against the odds and with a depleted squad and with players that couldn't even attend, had to quarantine out of captain's run the day before, and they still turned up and all but won the game. Admittedly, Adam O'Brien, the master of excuses, might be overstating how sick some of the players were. But whatever the case is, I'm not expecting the virus is still lingering. What I am saying is mentally, you are shattered from games like that. You do see teams unable to pick themselves up a week later after a heartbreaking defeat. The Raiders turned it on late, luckily for the best bet. But the funny thing about the best bet is we played minus 11.5, and the Raiders were up 6 with 10 to go. And I was still pretty confident, this game looks like the Raiders will hammer in one more try and seal this. And sure enough, we get a try with about 7 to go, and the Raiders are up 12. And not that I was sure we were going to win at that point, because you can get backdoored, but I was kind of like, it'd be nice if the Raiders won by 12, because when you get a better line than the market, and that line went all the way to 14.5, by the way, and we've beaten the line the majority of times this season. I don't feel we've been rewarded probably as much as what we've beat the market, but I digress. I would have been quite happy to win, by half a point. That'd be nice. And in fact, the Raiders turned it on and scored 2 more tries. And the crazy thing is, not only did the Raiders score twice in the final 3 minutes, so the score was a total blowout, but they actually scored another time with Timoko, only the bunker found that he spilled it because he mucked around with his put down. So, the Raiders nearly scored 4 tries in about the last 7 minutes, which just shows that Para had given up. But also it shows that Raiders' physical punishing style can wear you down eventually. And that's what could happen in this game too. And that's why I'm not afraid to lay, over 2 converted tries. I'm playing minus 13.5. Chris is out. Sasungi starts at center. Yeah, I think it'll be a similar type of game. But the difference is, I reckon if the Raiders get up 12-0 early, I don't see the Knights fighting back. I really could see the Knights capitulating here. So just give me the green machine. Even if it's close for 60, you can still win by, you can still be up 4 and end up winning by 16 type of scoreline. But as I say, this would be my candidate for a team to get crushed this weekend as well. I think the Knights' heads could still be spinning after Halasima's barnstorming. I'll try again. Halasima's barnstorming run that ripped their red and blue hearts out of their chest. That leaves one game, Bulldogs, Manly, to break down. And this is that finals rematch from last year, that instant classic in 2024, which Manly won, of course. Both of these teams won by 2 points on Saturday. The difference between the wins was the Dogs were expected to win, unlike the Seagulls versus the Storm. And I admit, Manly really impressed me. They're not my favourite team this season. I've rarely been on Manly. I don't think Manly are as good as other people might. However, they're sitting there in seventh position. And, they're a funny team to assess. And I don't know if Undertaker is in the comments, as he sometimes is, but Undertaker said to me, we're hopeless. Like 3 weeks ago, he'd given up. But 3 weeks later, Manly's won every game and just had an emotional win in Melbourne, and they're back. As for the Dogs, they'll be thanking Manly for that win in Melbourne because that allowed the Dogs to climb back to second, which is important because even if you're on a collision course with the Storm in the finals, you'd much rather be hosting that game than travelling south. So let's establish highly important game for both sides. Cherry is back for the Doggies, but Manly has a even more huge inclusion in Hamole. And yet I'm still on the Dogs, and I'm confident that I've got a simple handicap here. Surprised this line is under 4 points. I think the Dogs are the superior team. Let me know in the comments if there's anyone out there who disagrees with my read here. In fact, I think the Dogs were the better team than Manly last year too. But Manly pulled off some magic in that finals game. And that's relevant because I think there's an element of revenge here. And if I look at the team list, Manly's got a slick back line, and that back line helped prove the difference in that finals game. Remember that solo try by Kohler? That was unreal. And again, the outside backs played outstanding against Melbourne for sure. But you look at the halves, you can question Galvin, but he does provide more upside, and you got more than a glimpse against the Dragons, which is going to do his confidence a world of good. And then the Dogs pack is why I'm on for a best bet here. As Ryan says, line feels low. I was expecting -6.5. The speed around the middle of the ruck is the difference. And I feel like that alone is going to allow the Dogs to score at least one more try. And that's all we need them to win by. And I like the Dogs bench on top of that. You've got an Origin winner in Kurt Mann. You got the breakout gun, Hayward, Hayes, Curran. They're all additive this year when they're deployed. And I know the Dogs have played a lot of tight contests and either losing or winning and failing to cover in recent weeks. But to me, the Dogs are still a genuine NRL contender this season. I don't believe you can say the same about Seagulls. Speaking of saying the same, Adonis is on for a best bet in this game. Surely he's going to agree with me as well.
G'day guys, Adonis here. I hope you're all safe and well. Round 21, coming to you on the back of a big win with the Raiders last week, taking our record to 13-5 on the live TryPod. Best bet this week is going to go to the last game of the round, Canterbury Bulldogs, -2.5, $1.90 on Ladbrokes and Neds against the Manly Seagulls. I know that Hamoli Olakau'atu's back, the big damaging edge forward. What a matchup against Kickout that's going to be. But I think that last-minute win against the Dragons is going to propel the confidence of Galvin and the rest of the side to really back Serrato and know that they made the right choice in the end. There looked to be some growing pains on Saturday night against the Dragons, but I think they're going to be better for that hit out. And I don't think that Manly's in the same class as the Bulldogs. I think the line's a little bit too short. I would have had this at 4.5, and I think it's going to move to there on game day. The defense of the Bulldogs is great. And the other fact I like is that this game last year, Manly actually knocked out the Bulldogs in the first week of the semi-finals. So there's going to be a little bit of revenge on their mind, a little bit of extra prep advantage without having to travel from Melbourne. I think Manly got a big win off the bye last week, and they might not be as high-flying as what everyone's expecting them to be. Bulldogs for the win for me. Good luck. Gamble responsibly.
I just messaged Adonis that I'm with you again because, of course, we both had the identical play last week with the Raiders, and I promised you we're picking these independently. And Adonis sends me this clip too late. He got me that clip 5 minutes before we were live, which might sound like plenty of time, but I've actually got to get the video. I've got to download it. I've got to upload it again in the virtual studio. And I'm always scrambling because, I want to make sure the lines are live and I've got to react to all the team list news. So I'm on a tight sort of turnaround to get this show up and running. And the boys send me the clip, and I trust it's going to be quality. And I just line it up for the game they tell me it's for. So I knew he was on this game. And yeah, it seems pretty simple. And not that I just like to play the obvious play every time, But I do feel like there's reasons why not everyone in the public is going to back the Dogs, and Manly just played their best game of the year. So I understand people might be on that. I don't need to talk about that game anymore because I gave you my breakdown, and then Padonis very much reinforced it. So that will do it. That's round 21 broken down. Let me know how you see it. As always, carry on the conversation in the comments. I love to chop it up with you guys. Best of luck on your plays. Let me know what you like or what you disagree with. And I'll be back in 7 days to do it all again. Lego.